So great. Thank you very much for sitting down with me today.
My pleasure.
Thank you for coming to the conference. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We have a great time here.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. So you're on the Enyo team, and I was just hoping that you could walk us through what exactly Enyo is, what it does, why it's important.
Sure. This is a return trip for us, so if anyone wants the long version, you can go back to my interview from October. But briefly, Enyo is a JavaScript application framework. And really our aim is to help developers build native quality cross-platform HTML5 apps. And so by native quality, I mean not just a web page or a website with some fancy widgets or effects, but something that actually clears the user experience bar that's set by native apps in terms of polish and performance and feel. By cross-platform, I mean something that'll run on all the major OSs across every type of device, from a phone to a tablet to a PC to a TV. And by HTML5, I mean, pure HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, as opposed to sort of a hybrid approach where we're mixing native components and HTML5. It's pure HTML5, so it can either be served from a server in a traditional web app style or packaged for installation on any of the various platforms.
And I mean, you mentioned components and widgets. Like, Enyo uses the term components a lot. Can you explain exactly what that is all about?
Yes. So components are a good part of our secret sauce, if you're not secret sauce, our special sauce, if you will, because everyone's got components. But basically, if you think about it this way, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS really evolved to do content on the web. And so there's a relatively limited set of native HTML elements, and they're mostly around delivering content. There are some controls there, like buttons and menus and things that start to feel more like applications, but fundamentally it's about content. And traditionally, web development on the client side has been almost like a layer cake. You've got sort of semantic markup, which is representing the content, and you've got CSS for styles, and then you've got sprinklings of JavaScript for interaction and effects and things. We find that that approach does not work well if you're trying to build something with the richness and complexity of a native application. When you're building an app, you really need to work at higher levels of abstraction, because if you're moving large chunks of UI around the screen in a performant way, or you want to extend the basic set of elements that HTML provides and make them available for use not just in one application, but a lot of applications, you really need to bundle together markup and styling and behavior in reusable components. And so that's really what we mean by components.
Gotcha. And so W3C also uses the term components. Like, how does that relate to your use?
Yeah, so it's actually almost a perfect match. I mean, a lot of the details are different, and really it's a matter of history. So when we started work on Enyo a couple years ago, the current efforts around web components at the W3C level were, perhaps a twinkling in some folks' eyes, but they weren't very far along. And we wanted to be able to address, shipping browsers and shipping OSs today. And so we had to do a lot of things, like come up with our own way for loading these components into an application, like come up with our own way of defining a component that comprised JavaScript and HTML and CSS together, and for inheriting from one component when you're building another component. A lot of these same problems are really being solved now in the W3C efforts, and we're going to start seeing those things appear. We already are, certainly in the case of Chrome, appearing in the native stack itself. And at that point, I think, our focus will be able to shift a little bit toward sort of the next layer above that. But really, there's almost a one-to-one mapping of the things that we're doing in Enyo to the things that they're doing in the W3C, and they're really designed to solve the same problems.
Yeah, yeah. The web's kind of like a dictionary like that, right? Like, people start using it, and then it gets defined.
Yeah, exactly.
So, just curious, because you had some big news recently, not personally, I guess, but professionally, where LG actually bought the whole team and also WebOS.
Yes.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And also just curious, like, how does that change things? Does it change the approach or the product at all?
So the fundamental approach is very much the same. So I think it's no mistake that LG bought us. They actually have
it wasn't a mistake. They didn't
it was
what? That was in my bag.
Yeah, we meant to buy something else altogether.
I was going to get a dozen bananas, and I got WebOS. Okay,
no,
glad we cleared that up.
Yes. They may well like bananas, but they were looking for an approach that was centered on open source and was open in the sense that they wanted to build an ecosystem for LG that wasn't a walled garden ecosystem because they recognize that that's not a winning strategy for them. But they did want to have control over the full stack. And so I think for them, they looked at what we were doing already in the open source space, already with a proven product, both at the OS level and the framework level, and it was a great match. So they're still very much committed, speaking for Enyo in particular, but this also applies to OS, to our cross-platform open source approach. So really nothing changes in that way. I will say that actually long before the acquisition, we've been working with LG on a partner basis, and so while we couldn't say anything about it for the longest time, we've been doing a lot of work on TV stuff. And so, for example, when you're sitting 10 feet back and you're using a remote control, you have to have lots of different types of interactions. You have to handle UI focus, if someone's using an old school remote with the up, down, left, right. So we've actually been doing a lot of work on that over the last several months, and we haven't released any of it yet because, again, it had to be secret before we were acquired, but we're looking forward to getting that stuff out into the open source code base too.
That's cool. And I mean, aside from that, anything else like cool and new coming down the pipe?
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I started to think about what we've done since October, the last time we sat down. And we've done a ton, and we released theming and a ton of new widgets and stuff like that. But we, more recently, we've rolled out support for a bunch of new platforms. So we now have support for Windows 8, Windows Phone 8, BlackBerry 10, Firefox OS. So we're sort of making good on our promise to cover all the major platforms. And then the other thing is, while Enyo's always been really opinionated about components and modularity and encapsulation, we haven't historically had much to say about sort of the separation of data from presentation. There's a lot of great frameworks out there that have done super work around that. So take a look at Backbone, take a look at Ember. So one of the things that we've spent a bunch of time on over the last several months is adding data binding functionality to Enyo, and then enabling you to effectively build an Enyo app in an MVC or MV star pattern, basically. Either out of the box by itself or more likely in combination with something like Backbone, which actually pairs really well with Enyo. So our MVC and data binding stuff is checked into our repo and GitHub. It hasn't made it into an official release yet. That's coming down the pike, but we're excited about that too.
Awesome. Well, great. Thank you very much for chatting with me.
My pleasure. Thanks, Dave.